Tucker Carlson is playing January 6th clips, and Chuck Schumer went on the floor of the Senate and said that Rupert Murdoch and Fox News should not allow Tucker Carlson to play footage from inside of the Capitol on January 6th again tonight after he did last night. I disagree completely with that argument, and I would suggest to you this is emblematic of how scared they are about the possibility that he is going to change the narrative. Remember, the January 6th hearings were a kangaroo court. It was a one-sided prosecutorial presentation. That is, I know Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger were ostensible Republicans on this committee, but they're basically Democrats. There was no balance here. Usually in a case, you would have the prosecution and you would have the defense. All we got on the January 6th committee hearings was the prosecution. What Tucker is now doing is providing a larger context of what the video inside of January 6th, the Capitol, show. And he's providing a fuller context as opposed to the edited clips which were shown that favor the January 6th committee. And Democrats are terrified of this because they have tried to brand January 6th. I mean, I think Karine Jean-Pierre said it again today, that January 6th was the biggest threat to our country since the Civil War. Not Pearl Harbor, not 9/11, that a small group of people, almost none of whom were armed, entering into the United States Capitol on January 6th was the biggest threat to the United States since the Civil War is absolutely ridiculous. There is no way to make that argument. It becomes even more difficult to make, however, when you watch more of the footage of that day and see that people like, for instance, the QAnon shaman are just walking around surrounded by 9 different Capitol police officers and that they're literally trying to open the door for him. When you see that the story that was told, oh, this is Officer Sicknick, he was beaten to death by protesters on January 6th, that's the story that Democrats shared. No, the reality is he was walking around fine on January 6th. He didn't die on January 6th. He wasn't murdered by protesters. Now, unlike a lot of people, I stand on principle, I stand on precedent, I stand on consistency. And I have argued for a long time that if you riot, if you trespass, if you commit acts of criminal vandalism, anything of that nature, you should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, whether you're a Republican, a Democrat, or an independent. Everybody has the right to protest. No one has the right to break the law while protesting. But we saw 6 months of protests surrounding BLM, almost none of which any of those people arrested, almost none of which any of them suffering significant criminal prosecution. In fact, Democrats actually raised money to bail everybody out who was arrested in any of the BLM protests. My argument is treat the January 6th protesters who broke the law and the BLM protesters who broke the law the exact same. Politics shouldn't determine how you are treated under our criminal justice system. How many people are actually arguing that? And why are Democrats so afraid of Tucker Carlson sharing greater footage? You had the prosecution. This is basically the defense. Both of them provide a fuller picture of what actually took place on January 6th. And what you're seeing is the Democrat narrative is being challenged. To a large extent, it is crumbling. And that is a good thing because we all should have access to this information. I think it should eventually be put up on a database where everybody can watch it. I don't understand how arguing that only some small part of these clips are perfectly fine to be seen, but not the whole thing. The Washington Post, which employs a individual who is also employed by ESPN, has a story up, and I can't believe this is real, demanding that all of the spring training games be removed from the state of Florida because Ron DeSantis is an awful human being that is attacking diversity and inclusion. Listen, here, I'm reading from the Washington Post. If baseball is still concerned about the legacy of the game, It's 15 franchises that started spring training last month in Florida should consider making the annual exercise an all Cactus League affair as long as DeSantis commands an attack on diversity. It's been the hallmark of his governorship, which many believe is a prologue to a presidential bid. And then it runs through all these things that are, frankly, just made up. About a year ago, DeSantis signed into law the Don't Say Gay bill. Now, look, all of this is symptomatic. All of it is symptomatic of what's going on in the larger context of what is going on in this world. And so the idea that there would be anything to justify pulling all of the Major League Baseball spring training teams out of Florida is so broken-brained. There are so many people on the left wing in this country whose brains are completely broken. They don't understand facts. They're terrified of DeSantis. They already tried to label Trump as Adolf Hitler. So how do you argue that DeSantis is worse than Hitler? They're going to try to do it because they have fundamentally failed and they don't understand the basics of what are going on right now as it pertains to Florida. We're going to have a good story up from Bobby Barack, I think, at Outkick soon. But ESPN commentator, Washington Post columnist says that Major League Baseball has to pull spring training, all 15 teams, out of Florida. Unfortunately, this is what happens when Rob Manfred pulled the All-Star game out of Atlanta. You set the precedent that if you decide a political decision in a state is unacceptable to you, even if you aren't very well informed by it, there is an expectation then in the media that it should be followed again and that those games should be pulled, that those teams should be pulled. Rob Manfred blew it. I think the worst single decision of his legacy as commissioner was that awful decision to pull the All-Star game out of Atlanta. Now, the Braves went on and won the World Series that year, but still, it was a mess beyond a shadow of a doubt.